Some trivial history to share with you about Father James. He loves curling. He says that being a farm boy from Schuler, Alberta, he grew up with curling. And that is something that both he and his dad loved to do. Father James has also been a pillar of strength for me. As I mentioned, I do not belong to any particular parish, and I'm grateful and fortunate to have had Father James to talk to during some of my most troubling times. Families are crying, so everything. Besides, he did study canon law, and since I am now an unemployed paralegal, Father James might be able to help me find some work. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Father James Hagel is now the pastor at St. Albert the Great. I'm pleased to welcome him now to present his talk called Eucharistic Adoration.
Eucharistic Adoration perhaps might be one of the older devotions in the Church, much older than, say, Father Jerome, as he was saying, the Divine Mercy only started in the year 2000. Its history actually goes back to the very early Church, where bishops were in the center of the city, and deacons would go out to the outlying areas bringing communion from the bishop's Mass. And so if you apply it to the city of Calgary, there wouldn't be any parish priests like Father Edmund, myself, or any of the other parishes. And there'd be deacons that would be at the Mass, and they'd run out to the outlying areas. So some of you are old enough to remember when Mindapore was a 20-minute trip outside the city. That's what a deacon would do. They go down to Mindapore from the bishop's Mass here in the cathedral and go down. Now what would happen is that the deacons would be doing this and bringing the communion from that Mass, but every once in a while they'd be sick, wouldn't be able to come to that Mass as well. And so they would reserve some of the Blessed Sacrament to wait for the deacon to come back so he could bring communion to the sick. Or perhaps there might be someone who got sick during that week. And so they began to reserve the Blessed Sacrament. Very often it would be in the back of the sacristy, because it was the most secure place in the church. But eventually, that sacristy became a place of prayer, where priests or other people would come to pray with the Blessed Sacrament. And so eventually it moved to the bodies of the church, as we have the tabernacle here in the church now. But security was always a concern. And so you know that we have a security guard here at Sacred Heart so that people can come into the church. So you think security is only a new issue? It's been all the way back to the beginning of the church to protect the Eucharist. Now the next big point of this devotion actually comes with St. Francis of Assisi. He's the founder of Franciscans, and as Father Kevin quoted, his famous saying is to preach always and use words if necessary. And part of the words that he preached when he did talk was preaching the wonderful gift of Eucharistic adoration. And so it spread throughout Italy as his Franciscans began to preach around, and then eventually spread through the rest of Christendom. Now jumping to today, that spirituality of adoration has actually permeated all facets of the church. And so deacons, for example, are called to adoration. Now deacons are not priests, and so they're active in the community and usually have a somewhat limited role in parishes, sometimes 2 or 3 hours a week at the most. And what they do is they live and work in the community. If they're not retired, of course, then they're just living in the community. But what the deacons do, they're not working, right? Sorry, Father Kevin found a joke where there wasn't supposed to be. And so they be living and working in the community, but they are supposed to have this devotion, this adoration spirit. And so they should, and the words should, not must, that they should participate with particular faith in the daily celebration of the Eucharistic sacrifice. And then this line comes, and it says, and adore the Lord present in the sacrament. Now what I find interesting is the directory and deacons actually list this before talking about the sacrament of penance, before talking about works of charity, which is what deacons are all about, Before talking about other devotions, including Marian devotion, which we focused our last Faithlife Session on, and before talking about the need and the great benefit of spiritual direction. And so it shows you the great precedence and the great, I want to say hierarchy is the word, the preeminence that adoration has among the spirituality of the church. Now, not only do deacons call to adoration, but religious are called to it too. We have active in our diocese religious sisters, some of them are Franciscan. Same St. Francis that started the preaching about Eucharistic adoration. We have the Franciscan missionaries of Mary working here in the diocese. Now, they're in active order, so they're doing things all around the diocese. But in their constitution, they're called to 1 hour of Eucharistic adoration with the Blessed Sacrament exposed. So they're busy doing all these things in the world, but they are called to adoration. Now, we also have the wonderful gift of the sister adorers of the precious blood here in the diocese, who are a contemplative order of sisters. And we perhaps know them because that's where we go to pick up our altar breaks. But their main apostolate is not necessarily that, but prayer. And so they pray each and every day for all of us. And so their prayer routine in the day is to pray 2 times a day for 45 minutes. And very often, the sisters will pray before the Blessed Sacrament. They're also called half an hour of adoration, as in addition to those 45-minute prayer periods in a day. Each week, they pray for each of our deaneries. The diocese is broken up into smaller groups, and there's 7 of them. There's 7 days of the week, and so the sisters choose to pray for each of our deaneries 1 day a week. Also, they have a holy hour for vocations on Thursdays. Each month, they have exposition of the Blessed Sacrament during their monthly retreat. Now, the religious sisters of the Adorers of the Precious Blood give us important distinction to kind of raise regarding adoration. Now, adoration can be used kind of as a generic term, which means any time that you pray before the Blessed Sacrament. But adoration can also be used in a specific sense. And in that case, it means that prayer before the Blessed Sacrament without exposition. That is, as we are today, sitting before the tabernacle. Exposition is a specific term that's used when the Blessed Sacrament is actually exposed in a monstrance. Or I looked up the word actually, ostinarium. How's that for a good word to use in the grocery store? And it's prayer where Jesus is exposed in that monstrance. And it has special place in many churches. Priests are encouraged to pray, to have the habit of the Eucharist as a center of their daily lives, with adoration, as Pope John Paul II said in Pastor Douglas Vobis. The laity also have adoration in their churches. Several of the churches have adoration during their times. One of the best examples probably in the city is St. Anthony's, where they've had perpetual adoration, and to use my specific term, perpetual exposition of the Blessed Sacrament for 10 years. This is the 10th year now. The anniversary is actually coming up in June of 2013. I remember actually too when I was doing my pastoral year down in Medicine Hat, Father David was pastor and bringing 3 churches together to form Holy Family. And what he did is, one weekend, he had adoration of the Blessed Sacrament exposed and had everybody pray for the new parish. And I remember a great turn that happened in the parish that weekend. And Father Chris Bouvet is actually here, and he probably remembers that moment too. That a great turn changed in the parish, and everyone was kind of talking about, oh, this is so wrong, and I don't think this should happen, and they're going to take away my church. And all of a sudden, they started talking about the new church because of the conversion that took place during that weekend. Because really, that's the point of what adoration is it brings us to that conversion. It brings us closer to Jesus Christ. And so we are a Eucharistic people. As Father Kevin said, all devotions bring us to. And if you notice at St. Anthony's, when they have exposition on Thursdays, they actually begin with the Eucharist at 9 o'clock. Adoration takes place in the church following there and concludes with Latin Mass at 7 o'clock. And so the day begins and the day ends with the Eucharist, because that is what adoration is intimately tied to. And so in seeing that Blessed Sacrament, when we have it exposed, we truly do see the face of Christ. And we are called to become more Christ-like as we assume that face.